All right. Looks like we're live. So I guess I'll open up with an introduction. Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending. I'm Graham. I'm the CEO and founder at Collabware. We focus on helping organizations really gain insight and management over all their information assets in the cloud, on-prem, and everywhere. And that's really our focus. So I'll hand it off to Jason.
Thanks a lot, Graham. I'm Jason Cassidy, CEO of ShinyDocs. We spent the first 4 years of our existence partnering with Microsoft, OpenText, and others, being additive to those solutions. And the issue that we identified is that not a lot of information was under management in those solutions. We wanted to go bigger. So we redesigned ourselves 4 years ago and now have a much better picture for organizations that have hundreds of terabytes or petabytes of data to understand what your information is. And I'll pass it over to Sandy.
Hi, I'm Sandy Serkis. I'm the CEO and one of the original founders of Valora Technologies. I'm realizing our intros are going to kind of sound similar, all of us, but we also do a lot of document analysis. We're kind of famous for our auto classification and with particular applications in e-discovery, data privacy, and records management. Oh, Dean, sorry.
Hi, Dean Brown, CEO for iPro. We focus largely on e-discovery as a software vendor in those areas and have more recently expanded using the data that we have for litigation, pre-litigation, et cetera, into some of the governance functions. We basically want to be the data that powers some of the policy and procedure decisions. Pete?
Thank you, Dean. Peter Baumann, CEO, founder of ActiveNav, previously known as Active Navigation, some of you may be familiar with. Much like Sandy and Jason, experts in the world, not least of unstructured data, for a variety of use cases that stretch from records management all the way through to post-breach and then even the e-discovery early case assessments.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. So backstage, we've got a number of information experts who are going to ask some questions. Looks like Lawrence is up first.
And looks like, yep, I drew the short straw. So here we go, everyone. We've been hearing a lot about artificial intelligence and machine learning, entering the space. I mean, we've been hearing about it for decades, to be honest with you, but it's becoming more of a reality, and when we talk about that reality, what is it when it comes to not only identifying rot and e-discovery, but really about how are we classifying and declaring records that we find? How real is that today?
So I'll be happy to hop in. There's two vectors to think about. Vector number one is the end user experience, which quite frankly, we're very close to. And I'd like to think that each one of these vendors is going to have a experience very similar to, hey, computer, I need you to find me the purchase order that's XYZ, and it'll respond back. And that is the obvious ChatGPT use case. However, behind the scenes, what does it actually mean to be able to find that asset information, that matter information? It's not all Bayesian analysis machine learning. Some of it is regular old good old pattern matching. Some of it requires humans in the loop to do things to identify what the computers aren't quite good at. So there's a variety and a plurality of tools out there that must come to bear to best understand your data. I think we have some of them, and some of the big players like Google and others have some of them. We need to start thinking like an ecosystem. How are we going to best use the best tools out there so that we can have that easy, what I'm going to call Star Trek bridge computer experience that's going to be brought by things like ChatGPT.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in too, because ChatGPT is getting a lot of hype. And for those who are familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, it's definitely on the hype roll. It's not the only thing going on in AI. As Jason mentioned, we've been using AI for a decade. In e-discovery, our bar is very, very high. So the AI tools that we use have to be not black box. A lawyer has to be able to explain the decisions that are being made, and the AI can't make up things to fill in blanks. So it really depends on the use case. 60% of our customers are using AI, especially for things like continuous active learning as they go through the e-discovery process. So those tools are already in play. I love, and we're playing with ChatGPT as well. but you very much have to think about the use case and the outcomes and your industry and the bars that are set for those particular use cases. ChatGPT, a lot of applications potentially for document summary and things like that in the legal space. For e-discovery, it's simply nowhere near prime time because you can't afford to fudge the facts. Now, we're huge. We have a very, very large AI team working within iPro. We're absolutely doubled down on it, but very, very careful. And so I do react a little bit negatively when somebody says AI, because there's thousands of disciplines, thousands of technical harnesses, and you have to really dig into the use case that you're trying to solve for.
I think.
Go ahead.
Okay, Dean, I certainly echo that. I think it's all about the use case, and from our experience, particularly when you're looking at a mass of data, it's not necessarily the panacea to solving that problem today. It will only get better, I think, as we go forward. But what we see time and time again, and I almost feel like an old record to myself because we've been saying this for 14 years now, but I think in the area that a lot of us operate here, it's about pragmatism over perfection. And it's about getting real results. And whenever we see customers seek perfection on a mass of data, they will fail. And I'm very comfortable saying that because we see them fail time and time again. And so if AI and ML, which I think we're all using within our various tool sets, can accelerate that process and enable the means of really dealing with massive data that people have very little knowledge or context around, then it's going to be a good thing, but it's not the panacea today. And we've got to remember what the use case is that drives, I think, the requirement and the tech stack.
I'll jump in then on this one. It's interesting, Lawrence, that you opened up with the idea that we've been using this technology for as long as we have, because we have, right? It's, you go way back to the beginnings of even any sort of information classification engine, and it was rudimentary machine learning even then. It's come a long way. But I think when we talk about the hype, curve, and we look at, where it's at now and ChatGPT and the kind of hype it's generating, the reality is most people don't realize it costs 10 cents for every query that ChatGPT responds to, right? Can you imagine the volume of cost behind that? We struggle in this industry to get projects funded. I mean, how do you fund something of that scale? And I think that's where we are on the hype circle or curve from a reality standpoint, is that we can train models on generic content and apply that generically as the GPT model does. But to train a model on your own content as an organization takes a tremendous amount of computing power still. It is absolutely cost prohibitive for an average organization to even consider something of that scale. And that's how far away we are from the actual reality of applying it. Because until organizations can compute the models themselves on their own data to have it contextually aware of the content that it's dealing with, I don't think we'll see the benefits that we might want to see right now. It's still a little ways away from that.
I'll add one more thing here, which is, what is the objective? It can't just be, look, hype, cool. That is not the purpose. So you have to kind of look at the end game and kind of, like others have suggested, kind of play the trade-off. Is it worth the cost in either money or effort? Or is what I'm doing good enough? So there are different users of these systems. There are people who know nothing, and there are people who have tremendous knowledge going in. So the same tool is not going to apply to both of those people in both of those use cases. So like kind of every tool, even something as simple as search, there has to be a kind of context around who's using it, why are they using it, what are the trade-offs, what's the benefit? And that's when you start to make those decisions about, okay, AI has a use down this channel, but not worth it down this channel or something like that.
Right. Thank you, everyone. I think we got another questioner coming up.
Oh boy, do we.
Uh-oh, it's Steve.
I want to thank everybody, all you guys and gal. Yeah. Thanks so much for putting yourself in the firing line this way. We all appreciate it. Not just the questioners here, but everybody watching and listening as well. So with that said, I want to pick up on a point that you all touched on about benefits and the cost of things. I know we were just talking about AI, but for a lot of my clients, and I'm sure others and your customers, that is still very much, I want to say, almost a stumbling block, trying to really quantify what is the value of this stuff that you all do and that they want to do. It's easy to describe. We have to do X, Y, Z, but trying to make the case can be hard. And these days, we have kind of a squirrely, confusing we're all operating in. Depending what you look at, things are either going gangbusters or is about to end, or both. So that as a preface, I'm very curious to hear from each of you what you're hearing about that, what customers are saying, the economy playing in their heads. Is it an obstacle? Looking at it as an opportunity, and not just for the clients and customers, but for you guys as well, because I'm sure you're having to make certain accommodations in your approach to allay whatever fears you're hearing, and at the same time saying, no, the time is really great for this. Discuss.
It's either the perfect nightmare or the perfect storm, isn't it? I think, panel.
Don't be afraid.
Yeah, we got 5 years. What do we had? We had cyber privacy, cyber pandemic, and then recession or recessionary pressures, and they all coalesce into the right drivers for customers to act after decades of inaction. They still struggle to act, but now is the moment, and so we're seeing all of those things play out. And I think the key thing, and I think something that we're not that good at yet, is arguing the ROI around unstructured data governance challenges, and it's still far too event-led to the above drivers, if you like. When there's a breach, everybody jumps and insurance policies pay out and things happen, and then very quickly everyone forgets and parks it for another day. And so I think I'm not sure if it really answers your question, Steve, but there's a lot going on out there, and I think we're in a particularly turbulent period, but usually good comes out of those things. And for us as the providers, it's for us to try and help our customers bring all those drivers together, make the case, but also find the financial case for doing this stuff. And it's hard in IG, and so I think ultimately IG needs to move across to a value proposition. Once you get to value, then you get the executive boards, and everybody becomes less frustrated because everyone's interested. So I won't hog the panel, but that's my kickoff. I'm interested to hear what my colleagues have got on that.
Well, thanks so much for hitting it from that angle, Peter. I really love it, because it's part of my normal talk track is people do business for one of three. People do things within their business for one of three reasons. It is to make more money, or let's say you're in government, make more positive press in re-electability, whatever money is for your organization, make more of it with the same resources. And if that doesn't work, how do you make the same amount with less resources? And the third tier is not how can I be the best compliant, best organized organization. The third tier, unfortunately, is what can I get away with not doing and stay out of jail, or not completely crater as an organization. So when you think of it in that context, it's not how can I do the best job of IG. It is, you gotta start thinking about it in terms of what's the essentialist set of things that I must do in order to drive either the level 2, which is make the same with less resources, or make more money, whatever money is for your organization, with the same resources. And if you can't align it, go back to the drawing board. And I think the problem is with every industry, I'm not picking on IG professionals or anything, we all have a handy hammer. I'll say, well, I am this type of engineer, and somebody comes to you and says, how do I solve this problem? I would say, you have to do this type of engineering because that's what I'm good at. And so we need to step back away from the fixedness don't have a fixed mindset that I don't want to pick on records managers or anybody, but I'm a records manager, therefore it's a records management problem. I'm an IG professional, therefore it's an IG problem. It has to be, what's the actual solution from an essentialist point of view, and how can I contribute to that? And if you approach it from that perspective, I believe you'll get more funding. You will actually have a better opportunity to serve your business, despite the fact you may not get the professional fulfillment that when you got your library sciences degree, you said, I'm going to go out there and do the best damn X that I'm going to be. Unfortunately, you might not be doing that when you're actually fulfilling the best needs of your organization.
Peter, I love the way you phrase the event-driven. iPro, in some ways, we're lucky. We do largely focus on the event-driven as a starting point. Deepen e-discovery. People have to respond or suffer the consequences, right? I think a couple of things I would add, not just the recessionary, there are, for many of the businesses we work with, whether they're on the government law or corporate side, other factors that are precipitating some of this. One we've already alluded to is the data growth. So when I joined iPro 4.5 years ago, we routinely talked to customers about gigabyte. Now our conversations are almost always around terabyte or petabyte issues. Staggering. Regulatory is the other one, especially for our European offices. The regulatory pressures are staggering. So in some ways, there's, for us, no choice for our customers, Steve. They're under either pressure or potential litigation or potential regulatory pressures. We had a call a couple of months ago from one of the European entities, a ministry asking us if literally the next week we could deal with 500 million documents as part of a rising inquiry. I mean, literally overnight, those kinds of things are emerging. So from a headwinds and tailwinds perspective, I would say yes, the macroeconomics, definitely a headwind for a lot of people, but in a lot of the issues that we deal with on a daily basis, they're exclusive of. Now, the other thing that I would say, I think we're getting increasingly better at is following the breadcrumbs upstream. So when we help customers deal with one of those events that Peter mentioned, breach, litigation, et cetera, what we're often doing is working with them to do a retrospective on what could have happened if they had applied good hygiene, good IG practices, et cetera. Or how do we prevent this in the future? So somebody gets sued. Many of our customers have what they call jokingly frequent flyers, right? Peter gets sued all the time, not because he's a bad person, but because of his role in the company. So you can either sit and respond to that each time responsibly, or you can start to transfer that lawsuit into a proactive footing using governance tools, governance policies, et cetera, whatever piece of that, and start to proactively look at how do you address Peter and his other 200 colleagues who are almost always involved in litigation. So I guess I would say that we're in a little bit of a good space in that we can deal with those customers dealing with the events, but getting better at tracing the events back to a proactive footing, which in almost all cases comes down to great IG practice.
I would suggest that we are almost on the opposite end of that spectrum. It's very interesting to hear you say that, Dean, because I would say most of Valora's clients are watching what's happening to other folks and don't want to be in that position themselves. So I would think that most of our clients are quite on the proactive end of the spectrum, and all the regulatory changes and all the data privacy activity is motivating them to get ahead of it so that they don't find themselves in the scary e-discovery, the scary breach, whatever it is, unprepared. Now, that may be a function of where they're located or size. Our clients tend to be, global organizations that are facing these issues on every front at the same time. So they kind of have to get it. And that speaks to, I guess I would call it kind of economy of scale here, which addresses both the ROI question and the economic factors. An organization that's large enough is almost like kind of an economic portfolio themselves. They've hedged by being involved in so many different countries and things like that. At the same time, they're incredibly exposed because of that. So we are seeing, certainly in the last, I'd say maybe 6 months, a much more proactive stance about the data that these organizations hold, and just the kind of combination of effects leading to that ROI being, kind of they're able to get off the dime now and go execute.
Yeah, I think my only addition, because I agree with everything that was said, is that one of the things that I try to present on regularly is helping IG professionals understand how to align to the mission and values and the direction the organization is facing at any given moment, right? So in this particular situation, these organizations that are our customers are looking at the market in different ways, depending on who they are. Some of them are looking at it going, maybe I'll hold off a little bit because I don't see the value enough. Maybe others are saying, yeah, I'm doubling down because now's the time to do it. What's most important for the IG professionals is to look at that and say, okay, well, what direction is important? What's keeping the executive team up at night? And how do I align to that? Because that's how they're going to get their funding. And when you look at it from that perspective, the downturn in an economy almost never seems to ripple the same way through information governance as it does through other areas. Because, I mean, honestly, even in good times, it's hard to get the funding for IG if you're misaligned. So, downtimes doesn't really make a big difference there. So I personally have not seen any real change in the actual market dynamics itself. What I have seen, though, is exactly what Sandy was saying, was that much more of an alignment towards why are we doing this and why is it important? And the IG professionals that are out there are building better business cases now than I've seen in the past. And I think that they may be taking advantage of this, which is a good thing.
Excellent. Thank you all very much.
Ready for our next question.
You're unmuted.
Muted, Ann.
I followed Jason's rules, and then I'm not unmuted. But I wanted to thank all of you for taking time from your busy days to spend time with us here. I mean, I know you have other things on your plates. My question is focusing around collaboration, and during COVID, people just went willy-nilly and wholesale adopted Microsoft Teams as their collaboration and communications standard, right? And I'd like to hear from your point of view, what kind of an impact you're seeing on Microsoft Teams being that new shiny tool, if you will, and from both a positive and a negative assessment. And then where do you see us going, or what do you think Microsoft's going to be doing? And I know Jason has a lot of insight into this, but where do you think we're going with the Microsoft Teams in the future? Where do you see it, spinning off to? And we'll start with Jason, since he's Mr. Microsoft.
Well, thank you. I didn't know I was Mr. Microsoft, but I certainly have strong opinions about Microsoft. So thank you so much. So Teams, I love it. It reinforced a message that I think a lot of us have been saying for so long, and that is the fact that there's no one place for IG. There's no one place to have your rules. Is that it is because it used to be that, and I think that died in 2007. It just doesn't have the sense to lay down yet. It's the idea that I can put it all in SharePoint, or I can put it all in OpenText, or I can put it all in FileNet or whatever. You can't say that this particular entry in a database is not a record. You can't say that. It could be a record from the definition of what the magistrate says. Forget what a technologist says. You can't say that this file isn't a record just because it's in Teams. So I loved it in that, like, we have customers that spawn 5,000 team sites, and that drove them wild. We have customers that spawn 50,000, and then we've got others that literally have millions. And it's, of course, big federal customers. So it's obscene the amount of different places, and you can't stop it. That's what I really like about it. The ship has sailed to say, well, I'm going to train everybody quarterly to use our records management system and deputize them to be records managers. That's gone. I love it. So now we have to look at it like it's instead of information governance being a train station like SharePoint or something like that, we have to think of it as being regional and international transportation. So is Boeing the best at regional international transportation? Is Uber? Are your sneakers? Like, they all play a part in this. So what I'm going to suggest is, yes, now we need to have a strategy for Teams, because there's always going to be files there, and there's always a chance that that's going to be a file that can be used for you or against you. And your file shares hasn't gone away yet, despite the fact that you've been 6 months away from migrating everything from your file share for the last 10 years. So like your SharePoint's not going anywhere because people are using it in your OneDrive. So we need to have a holistic view. And how do you do that? That's it. That's for these vendors to come up with and say, not only you need to do this, but we need to give you an easy pathway based upon your maturity. This is how you're going to deal with Teams using either our tools or our friends' tools. This is how you're going to deal with database entries. This is how you're going to deal with the fact that there's more files going into Salesforce and into Maximo and into all these other support, Workday and other systems that could be information that is required for your governance. So thank you, Anne, so much for bringing it up. And I apologize that I didn't hit Microsoft so directly, because
That's okay.
the reality of the systems.
I loved what you had to say. Graham, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I see it very much the same way, Jason. I see Teams helped people see the picture of information being everywhere. Our customers even have like Discord servers, right? Like their Discord servers are out there, Slack's out there, Teams out there. It's been there for a long time, but nobody quite saw it the same way until Teams kind of infiltrated the organization. So I think that much to Jason's point, it really does help people see that information needs to be managed everywhere, not just in SharePoint or OneDrive or file shares or whatever. And I think that only helps, right? Because if we can broaden the discussion and turn it, away from being centralized this, centralized that, then I think it's going to benefit not only the users who are using the information, but the people who are trying to manage the information. Now, if you ask me my personal opinion on Teams, I would love it if it would just operate like 60% of the time would be great. I would aim for 60% without crashing. That would be fantastic. So Microsoft, if they're listening, please.
Yeah, let's hope that. Peter, how does it impacting your business model?
I guess the easiest way as a CEO to answer it is that one of the first things we did come out of the pandemic was build a collector for our cloud product into Teams. And the reason for that was organizations were terrified about what's been put in there in terms of sensitive information data. And so we built a collector to it. It's probably one of the most popular parts of our cloud products, I think, and it scores the relevance of the data in Teams, and it's Teams chat plus attachments. Attachments, I think for those in the know will know that's the easier part to architecture. And so it's the chat as well. So I think that says it all. We're seeing big demand, a lot of concern about what the content is in there. And I think in the year halfway through pandemic, it was more about Slack. And then as pandemic came to close, it was more about Teams.
Well, thank you so much. Dean, what are your thoughts on this?
Some of you have heard me say this before. We have one customer who does 33,000 entries every day, 365 days a year. So do the math.
Yikes.
Teams and Slack are technically a beast. From an IG perspective, Microsoft is outrunning governance. Every day, there are new features being added to Microsoft Teams that are barely being documented and almost no one's aware of. There's some new file formats. I noticed just a couple of weeks ago, I now have the ability to embed a little video and a message to my own internal teams. Keeping up with it is a nightmare, honestly. Like Peter, we've built our own collectors. We have teams assigned to this. More pragmatically, let's say someone accuses Dean of something nefarious. And okay, let's go collect Dean's Teams chats. Well, I'm having chats every day with our European staff. How does that border on privacy concerns and collection and legal hold and? And by the way, these conversations extend over a couple of years. How do we then parse the part we care about? Not the 287 days that Dean was talking about, nothing anybody cares about. The way Teams works or Slack works, right? We interject this threaded discussion over time. How do you condense some of that to be able to actually even understand the conversation you care about? We're presenting lawyers with thousands of pages of Teams conversation. It's untenable. Back to the kind of AI conversation, right? This is a logical point for AI to be applied to be able to reduce and consolidate these. But so I'm honestly, we use Teams every day. I'm a fan of it in many ways. Sorry, Graham, doesn't crash for me, so check your computer settings. But for our customers, it is a beast. And even the collection stuff is not straightforward. Ephemeral documents, modern attachments, it's a link. It's not actually a doc. So how do you deal with those when you start to need to pull that forward, especially in the context of e-discovery or something like that? And Microsoft itself is doing its no favors. Purview is a collection of disparate apps that actually doesn't accomplish what you need. Even Teams' own internal compliance APIs, you have to bring an IT staff to bear and start writing PowerShell scripts if you really want to deal with it. That's not tenable for most normal human beings. So it's a beast. Going away.
It's a beast. So those are all very, very, so far, really great insight. And Sandy, I would see you shaking your head throughout each one of them. So why don't you give us your insights on what you're finding and your thoughts are about current versus future state of Microsoft Teams?
Sure. I would say our experience is most similar to Dean's there, actually. And I would say this is typical Microsoft. Microsoft has been true to form here. They've created an application that has tremendous value and very easy for users, very easy to onboard and start stuffing with content, either kind of the textual content or files and attachments. And they've done a pretty good job defining, anyway, APIs underneath. It's that middle, not so good. Where exactly is this stuff being stored? Well, sometimes it's SharePoint, and sometimes it's Exchange. And so if it's being stored in Exchange, is it more responsive to regulation around email, or is it more responsive to like content management, or is it both? And so they've kind of, again, sort of ignored the middle ground of records management, applications, and anybody that needs to play a role between hardcore technical and end user. That middle ground of IG has been kind of left behind. And so we see this with Teams. I agree. Everyone is confused about that middle ground. And so we're kind of making it up as we go along, which isn't so bad because Microsoft keeps changing it as we go along also. So we're just kind of in this sort of odd arms race in a way. The last thing that I will add is that we certainly, and this may be a little bit self-selected, who's Valora going to run into, but clients don't particularly want to be beholden to Microsoft as a sole solution for absolutely every aspect of what they do. So in some ways, there's a little bit of a resentment that it's so easy to get content and everything into this Microsoft world, except for applications that really have nothing to do with Microsoft. What do you do with your Slack data? What do you do with your stuff in Salesforce? Things like that. They don't really play well together, and it's hard for the clients to track, but at the same time, they don't want to be beholden to a single vendor like that. They want to have that flexibility. So it's an interesting line for Microsoft to walk.
Absolutely. So we're moving on. I did great insights, by the way. Thank you. You all answered them from a different way. I thought there was lots of interesting information that people can take back and start thinking about. Our next person that's here from our Hall of Fame team is Jesse Wilkins.
Hi, everybody. My question is about privacy. I think we all know that privacy is the forefront of a lot of organizations' minds, both for compliance and in support of their broader customer trust. But here in the US, at least, we have a broad patchwork of privacy regulations. And of course, if you're a multinational, it's just that much worse. So my question for you is, how do you recommend that your customers address this today and prepare for whatever we're going to be inflicted by for the next couple of years?
In the absence of somebody jumping in, I'll jump in. So it's I'll start with how we're looking at it. We work with Ann Kavukian, who's work with her in as much as we're close friends with her and do some podcasting, and her daughter-in-law, who's the former of former head of privacy at Facebook, former. it's one of our advisors. So I mean, it's important to us. But to me, the biggest issue when it comes to privacy is it comes back to when I invoke Kavukian, as she says, privacy by design. So that means that when we initially put our systems in place, we were thinking about the privacy concerns. So therefore, we were able to proactively act on these privacy concerns. Wouldn't that be cool if that ever actually happened for the systems that we're using for the last 30 years? So everything that we're doing right now is playing catch up, like we're just trying to sniper find the thing that's going to get you in the most trouble and deal with that, which isn't a great place to be. So I will say, like, if there's probably everybody on the call here has some cool solutions for identifying PII, for identifying and then perhaps being able to action it either with software consulting or whatever. Yes, that's what we do as well. But it is the thing that I think our audience, I hope that we're all considering is, at some point, are we willing to actually pay the extra overhead associated with security by design, which is separate from privacy by design, which is the topic, and other things, robustness of the actual solution itself, so that Teams isn't crashing somewhere between 0 to 60% of the time, as we assessed on here. All these things cost extra money. It's more planful, and which means that we can't just outsource the coding to the lowest bidder. We can't just have a shoestring budget for IT. So anyway, it's kind of a almost defeatist attitude in that we're going to do the best we can from a forensic point of view and try to find this information and do the best we can. But until we start taking this seriously from front to back, I think it's going to be a tough road for us to actually comply with these regulations.
I think I would jump in. I love that you brought up security. That, to me, the two have to go hand in hand. It's great if you've got all your privacy management around all your data, but if you don't have security, that data is going out anyways. So sure, it's got PII in it, but now your problem is that someone else has that PII, right? So the two have to go hand in hand. And I think that this is one of the most, important conversations to have now, is most of our customers are still trying to figure out their way around the regulations, because they keep changing. There's new ones coming out, there's new ones being brought forward. They have to understand them, and they look at it from the privacy standpoint. Okay, well, how do I properly manage the information? How do I get rid of it properly? How do I make it available to someone who's requesting it, lawfully? And then they get around eventually to security. But then once you get to the security part, it changes the dynamics of all the other conversation. So I think that, when people are looking at it, when our customers are looking at it, I always encourage, like, we bring security by design absolutely as the number one topic for us. If you've got proper security, you can protect the PII. Then you can dive into where you have PII and what you can do with it and managing your processes. But if you can't protect the information from the very beginning, the rest of it is a moot point. It won't matter that you've identified it all, because your first problem is going to be, how quickly are you responding to that breach that you have with that public or that private information, right? That's going to be your problem, and that's not the problem you want to have. So I really put the focus often on the security side of the equation first, so that we can secure the information, so that then we can manage the privacy aspect of what we have in that information.
I'll jump in. One of the things that I always find surprising is when folks that are a little bit more on the records management end of the spectrum will say things like, oh, I don't have to worry about data privacy. That's someone else's responsibility, which I think is just insane, because content that has personal data inside it might very well affect the record keeping of that content, either its classification or the duration, or even getting into security, where and how it's stored and who may access it. So that's the first kind of line of overlap. But the second line is this kind of hot area of data minimization, which is, why do you have this in the first place? How long are you keeping it, and for what purposes? And so does the content that you have, particularly personal data content, have you exceeded the use and the duration that you claimed when you gathered that information from people in the first place? And that is the area that is completely tripping people up. They don't even realize that this is happening. And I'll give you my favorite example. which is if you order from Uber Eats and they collect your cell phone number, it says there, this is in case we have an issue with your order, we'll contact you. They are keeping that cell phone number far beyond the transaction and far beyond the reason that they have said that they would do so. That's a great example of, did I give permission for that? Is this now a marketing use? These are things that are all interrelated. This is what I'm kind of thinking is like privacy 2.0. It's not just, yep, we have some personal data. It's why, how long, how are you disposing of it? And can you prove that you've kind of complied with all of that? That's where we're going.
I'll jump in. I love that, Sandy. I think a lot of the audience there are probably records managers. And the great irony here is it's only really records managers that understand an organization's data, specifically their unstructured data, and who has the lowest or the least or the quietest voice now in the cyber room, the records managers. And so I hope we go through an evolutionary cycle, and in 5-10 years' time, a lot of these problems will come back to records managers and away from InfoSec people who don't understand the data. And so at the risk of being a little bit controversial, I think a lot of the market has been hoodwinked by the big West Coast money that's come piling into the space on the back of privacy regulations. A lot of privacy platforms have been built that claim to have it all under control, and they literally don't. They're manually driven processes a lot of the time behind these things, and the only data they really get a good feed on is structured data, because guess what? It's structured and it's sitting in a database and it's easy to manipulate. So why do we keep spending all our time there? Because they think it's too hard, or they don't know how to deal with the unstructured piece. And so none of those platforms have got an accurate feed coming into them. Don't believe the the hype. It's really not there. And I think there's a few people in this call would do exactly what I'm talking about and would agree with me, because it's all we do, it's what we live for. And so I think the market needs to wake up, and it would be helped if the courts started asking harder questions around some of the data that's under the microscope, if you like. And specifically, if you think about things like GDPR, and well, it's CCPA, but GDPR, I think it's either Article 30 or Article 33 as well, since I've had to talk to it. They talk about a data inventory. Oh my gosh, we get into such confusion in our market, which is what we should be trying to help. Data mapping, data inventory, it goes on and on and on. There's 3 or 4 ways to describe it, and everyone has a different view on what it is. And if they really mean a data inventory, then it means you need to know everything about all your data. And so you can find Sandy and Jason and Dean's data in your unstructured assets as well. And at the moment, everyone has a slightly different view of it. And the only time they really care, in my experience, or our experience, if you like, is when they've been breached and they are under a consent order, or someone somewhere has said, no, you now need to do this. It's not good enough just to say we have a file share over in Denver. You now need to tell us what's on the file share and that you've actually gone through the right process. And so something needs to change. It probably needs to be driven at a court judgmental level down, and then I think some of those privacy regulations need to be tweaked to reflect that a lot of this stuff is now possible, rather than basically put a cover over and say, oh, it's too difficult, therefore it's unreasonable to ask the organization to actually deal with it. So anyway, there you go. No bitterness towards West Coast money.
Yeah, no, great points. Your points about data map and GDPR, et cetera, I wanted to extend on, because the nuances, and Jesse, great question. The nuances and interpretations, I'm a technologist at heart. I mean, I can design technology programs, but this is more of an organizational design, organizational communication issue in many ways. Unfortunately, it's complicated by still evolving interpretations of the laws that are in place, emerging permutations. So yes, we refer to California, but there's 5 other states that have nascent programs that will not be identical. And then the data map itself, right, should be a fairly straightforward technical issue. But in Germany, if we want to index that data, we often find ourselves in front of workers' councils on what is being indexed and why, and purpose and outcome and retention and then you go to the UK and it's a different set of concerns, not so much around the technical application of let me index the data, let me classify it via this AI model, but now people are involved. And for us as a vendor in the marketplace, that's probably the hardest thing, is the number of paper cuts, permutations, et cetera, that occur with any large company that's dealing with staff in different geos, whether they be domestic or international. And that's really, for most of our customers, and Sandy, it'd be interesting to explore it over a beer with you, your customer base, but most of our customers just don't have an answer for the company's perspective on things, even what should be fairly simple things like legal hold. Oh, technically a straightforward answer, not if it includes Germany and Belgium and the Netherlands and the UK and California. Now it's, a C-level conversation around what's our risk of doing that and how hard do we push through it. So definitely a question on point, Jesse, in terms of the times we live in.
Thanks, everybody.
I'm back. That was really really great conversation there. I'm deep into the CIPP myself right now, so I'm like, oh yeah, cool. At the risk of giving everybody whip, however, I want to explore a different end of things. You're all on the tools side of all this, and so I'm really curious to know, from where you sit, what's the single biggest piece of technology that doesn't yet exist, or maybe you don't have yet, that would benefit the kinds of people who are tuning into this conversation? You're not allowed to say AI or machine learning. We'll sort of stipulate that those already exist, even though they're not out there in full force. But from a technology standpoint, what's the piece that you would love to create, invent, get California evil money plowed into? Dean, you indicated that you love technology, so why don't you go first?
I got to say, it's a tough question, Steve. There's a lot of things on my laundry list. Honestly, for our customers, it's not so much a technology problem, honestly. Our customers for iPro, many of them need to look at their processes differently. Many of the technologies you rattle off have great application and are already being used. The problem I see in many ways is a lot of the technology happens, in many of my use cases, very late in cycle. So if you think about, putting your black belt hat on, in many of the processes that we deal with technically, there's 98 to 99% waste. Think about the classic e-discovery process, litigation, et cetera, 99% waste. If you apply those technologies you mentioned, and my laundry list of cool new things, earlier in process, on data as it sits, structure, unstructured, I don't care. There are economies of scale to be gained that are dramatic. So I'm going to whiff on your question. I don't think it's a technical question. I think it's a process question in many ways that can actually generate more real outcomes than what's on my bright shiny list.
Yeah, it's I like where Dean's headed there. I'm gonna see if I'm building on it or not, or taking it a different direction. So there is like when you think of the PC, for example, PC or smartphones or whatever, the first PC that you had to know a bunch of stuff. You had to edit auto exec bats and config sys's and set up your own mouse drivers. And it was a bit of a slog to get Wing Commander up and running and play that game. It's expanded memory and all these other things. So what can computers do today that computer couldn't do? Well, there's not many things that are kind of new for computers. Like you could have done a financial transaction on that computer that you had back in 1990. You could do all sorts of pretty much everything you could do today. Today, it's just a little faster and easier. And that, I think, is the trick. That's the technology that's missing, is we don't think about what magic happens when we turn the key in our car. Now you even press a button. You don't even turn a damn key. We've gotten so easy. We want outcomes to be that easy. So if I could wave a magic wand for my tech, it wouldn't be I want better AI. It's not true. The AI actually works pretty good. I wouldn't want a more scalable ability to index and visualize data. That's actually pretty good. What I'd want is a big button that is get Steve's outcome. You press the button and then it connects to the file shares and it connects to the SharePoints and it connects to the open text and then it gathers the information, applies the models to it. It does everything that right now we need to do that interaction. We need to, like Dean said, it's identify what are the business processes that you're trying to attach information to. What are the decisions that people are trying to make right now where they need information either ad hoc or structured? And out of that will then come the governance rules. If you don't know how a document attaches to structured and unstructured processes, then you don't know how you should retain it. All of those things come out of that. And I would love to have a button that says implement Steve's rule for what he's trying to achieve. And boom, he gets it. All the tech's there, but right now we have wetware. We have humans that assemble it together and work with the customer and ask them a bunch of questions and then put their meta information into the system. And then off it goes and it actually gets the outcome. I'd love to eliminate that middle human performance piece.
So I'm gonna jump into this. Steve, it's a great question. It's right up my alley. I love it. Every Thursday, I go out with a good friend of mine. We drink copious amounts of alcoholic beverages, and we discuss all these exact sort of things. Like, what is really going to be that thing that comes in the future? Of course, we're wrong 90% of the time. But in this particular instance, there's two things that I think would be really, really awesome if we could somehow figure out how to do it. And it comes from two perspectives. One, from the people who work in our organizations, a way to see if that meeting invite actually needs me to be there. Oh man, the amount of savings we would have as organizations if it could just say, you know what, Graham, you're not needed for this. Oh, fantastic. Okay, so if I could get that one, I would be a super, super happy person. And as a CEO, the one that actually keeps me up at night is that link in that email, don't click it. Do not click that link. If it could somehow just warn you as a user, this link is bad. Don't click this link. That would be amazing. I would sleep so much better. Those are my two.
I'm happy to jump in. I started with the legitimate question that you asked, Steve, which is like, what is a technology that would be really great? But then I also kind of got a little bit broader. So the narrow answer is I would love to see reliable handwriting and image recognition because, you know, we have such good text analytics, and then we get to a signature and it's just like, bleh. And yes, there have been some movement and progress there, but it's one of those areas that we're also distinct as human beings, that the technology is really not very reliable. I would love to see that, but that's almost a self-centered Valora kind of answer. The bigger picture is I want to see Moore's law play out 3 or 4 more times, because what tends to take a long time here when we're talking about petabytes of data is just the pure crunching through things. When you're pulling out, 80 fields of metadata and, preview images and all these other sort of delicious things to the client, that is a processing hog. And so I want to see the equivalent of like fusion power for generating power for us. I want to see that happen in terms of computer processing, where we're seeing 10,000-fold improvements, so that we can, like we used to say, oh, a terabyte a day, like, oh, look at us go. I want to see, a petabyte an hour kind of processing without literally melting Earth. That is what I would love to see.
Well, I think I'm the last, aren't I? It's hard to know where to follow. We've been all over the map on this one, haven't we? For good reason. Steve, so I'll have a pop at it if you like, Steve. I think there's and it's maybe not a machine as such, but I think there's a proactive and a reactive, and we're currently living in the reactive. And I think what our customers want today, not thinking into Sandy's world just yet, but right now in the next 5 years, is an easy button. And they just want an easy button to resolve their biggest headaches. And at the moment, it's just too hard. And we, as vendors, haven't solved the problem yet. It's still too hard for our customers. I think the smarter side, which I know a lot of you are addressing, is the proactive side, is we've got to reduce the amount of this content up front, whether it's not going to that meeting or being on the meeting invite, but specifically around privacy information. There's no need for all this information to be out there. And we've got to somehow get a grip of that in the first instance. And then we've got some hope of dealing with it, I think, at the back end. But if there's one thing we talk about in our business, is we've got to get to the easy button, but it's only a fix because no one can solve the first problem.
It's fun, Steve. Most of us didn't go to a kind of concrete, bright, shiny tech piece, which I find fascinating. I think most of us are technical.
Of a team, so I'm gonna.
Interesting. We're realists.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm going by your faces. I didn't mean if I stepped on someone. It's probably a good time to wrap. Because the wall says we've used up the time in a blink, and I'm making the presumption that you can actually hear me. I do want to thank you all again, as we said, as sincere from the heart. You guys are amazing. There is often this sort of false picture of an adversarial relationship between the vendors, and you here are, living proof that that is not necessarily the case. In fact, most often not the case. So again, thank you very much. I think probably lunch is next. I'm looking at the chat. I hate to be the one between people and food and drink. So thanks again.
Yeah, it's our pleasure, Steve. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
All right, thanks, everybody.